Hello Magic players, this is Steve from Untapped Games, and today I'm going to open a modern event deck. I'm pretty excited about this. The event deck is intended to be an avenue to get into the modern format. So we're going to see what's inside. Already it's different than most event deck boxes. It doesn't have the same proportions. And I think that there's a little bit more that comes in this one. It's more expensive than a normal event deck. That's partially because the format is more expensive. Yeah, there promises to be some pretty good cards in here. So I'm just going to read the back first. Get started with the deep strategy, modern format and style. Draw on rare, high-powered Magic cards from past sets with this tightly constructed 60-card deck. Also includes a 15-card sideboard, strategy guide, spin down, life counter, 80 exclusive card sleeves, 5 double-sided tokens, and a deck box. Pick up the modern event deck and find a modern event near you. And this is called March of the Multitudes, is this deck. Leaders like Elspeth, Knight Errant, generate an army of token creatures, while spells like Intangible Virtue and Honor of the Pure inspire them to victory. White removal cards along with black disruption keep your opponent off balance until you can strike the killing blow. So that sounds like a weenie deck to me. I haven't taken a look at the deck list because I kind of like being surprised. So it's black and white, and let's take a look at what's inside. And already I can tell there's like a different texture to this than most boxes. This is almost reminds me a little bit more of like a From the Vault deck. I don't know if you can see it, but there's definitely like a special texture to this. This is a slip cover that comes off, and then this also has texture to it. So this is all fancy and advanced looking. And this is the inside. So there's 2 columns in here. Oh, and then there's subcompartments. So I've got these card sleeves with the Planeswalker symbol on them. Let me just open them just alike. So they look to be Ultra Pro. So they should be basically like Ultra Pro printed sleeves. Those are nice looking, and they match the outside of your deck. Everything's all matchy-matchy. Before I get to the actual deck, here is what's probably going to be a deck list or a strategy guide. Yeah. So I've got a deck list right there, and a guide on how to play the deck, and more card sleeves. And here is my life counter with, I guess that is the modern symbol that they're going for with this deck. So it's got its own little set symbol. So I'm going to go into the deck itself. Okay. So first we have Soul Warden. It's a white human cleric. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life, and it's a 1/1. So that's interesting. Let's see what that means as we keep going. We have Tidehollow Sculler. For a white and a black, you get an artifact creature zombie. When Tidehollow Sculler enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand and you choose a non-land card from it. Exile that card. When Tidehollow Sculler leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to its owner's hand, which is kind of like a Oblivion Ring effect on a card that's in your opponent's hand. That's a lot of mileage in this one little card, because you're getting to look at your opponent's hand, you're getting to exile something that they have waiting in the wings. So whatever their next strongest card is going to be, it's not going to see play. as long as this guy's out. So that's interesting. I wonder if you could do what you do with Oblivion Ring and kind of like get this guy gone before he hits the field so that the leave the battleground effect never takes place. I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up. But he's a 2/2 body on top of all that, and it looks like we have 3 of them. That's pretty awesome. We have 3 Path to Exiles. That one's pretty simple. For 1 white, it's an instant. Exile target creature. Its controller may search his or her library for a basic land card, put that card into the battlefield tapped, then shuffle his or her library. So it's kind of like a Swords to Plowshares kind of a thing, except it's going to give your opponent a land card. But usually you're choosing something that's more important than just giving them more mana would offset you. Inquisition of Kozilek from the Rise of the Eldrazi, I believe. That's a sorcery for a 1 black. Target player reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-land card from it with converted mana cost 3 or less. That player discards that card. So I'm seeing a lot of hard control on your opponent's answers, which is probably going to pave the path for your ground plan with things like Elspeth that they mentioned. Shrine of Loyal Legions for 2 colorless. You get an artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, or whenever you cast a white spell, put a charge counter on Shrine of Loyal Legions. Then with 3 and tapping it, and then sacrificing Shrine of Loyal Legions, put a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature token onto the battlefield for each charge counter on Shrine of Loyal Legions. So this is intended to generate lots of creatures. You hopefully get that out soon, and then later in the game pop a bunch of 1/1s that are probably going to get buffed by stuff like this, although not this in particular because they're not white. But Honor of the Pure, we have 3 of them, and they're 1 and a white for enchantments. And the enchantment reads, white creatures you control get +1/+1. That's going to come in handy for Elspeth later on because she makes 1/1 creatures. Now we have 4 intangible virtues. For 1 and a white, you get an enchantment that says creature tokens you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance. So in line with the same theme, we're buffing exactly like the text on the back of the box said. We're buffing up our little weenie creatures, and they're getting big and strong. Speaking of weenie creatures, Raise the Alarm. It's pretty standard staple of this sort of a deck. It's an instant with 1 and a white. Put 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield. We have 3 Zealous Persecutions. For a white and a black, you get an instant that reads, until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1, and creatures your opponents control get -1/-1. So it's a sort of very one-sided equation there. As the title Zealous Persecution would have you believe. So that could potentially be a board wipe against your opponent. It's nice. And our first mythic is Sword of Feast and Famine. For 3 colorless mana, you get an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from black and from green, so it's good against black removal that might take out some of your key stuff. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card and you untap all lands you control. So that's going to allow you to up your economy of actions per turn, provided you have the cards in hand. Or if you have stuff that you're using, stuff that's in play that has activated abilities that require mana would also benefit from that. Lingering Souls for 2 and a white. You get a sorcery that says put 2 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield, and it flashes back for 1 and a black. So this has a recurring flashback is basically a recurring effect. You may cast this card from your graveyard for its flashback cost, then exile it. So once again with the creature token theme, Spectral Procession is a black or a white, a black or a white, and a black or a white for a sorcery that says put 3 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. That's one of the interesting things about this card is usually in a dual. Oh, sorry, I'm reading it wrong. It's not a black or a white. It's 2 mana or a white, 2 mana or a white, and 2 mana or a white. So if you don't have 3 white mana, you can sub in 2 mana for that 1 white mana. My fault, I read that wrong. So it's a sorcery that says put 3 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. So it's a lot like Lingering Souls, except potentially more costly, and it doesn't have flashback, but it's going to provide us another 4 of that gives us creature tokens. And now, speaking of creature tokens, we have Elspeth Knight Errant is going to help us out in that regard. She's a planeswalker. She was just in the Theros block as well, but not this version of Elspeth. This is the earlier version. She's 2 white, and she's a planeswalker. And her +1 ability is put a 1/1 white soldier creature token onto the battlefield. So that's pretty standard. And then another +1 ability is target creature gets +3/+3 and gains flying until end of turn. So when she comes out the first time, she'll put up 1/1 creature, and then the second turn that she's out, she can make that creature essentially a 4/4 flyer, which is cool. Her -8 ability is you get an emblem with artifacts, creatures, enchantments, and lands you control have indestructible. That's scary to have her counting up to for your opponent. We have 4 Caves of Koilos. It's a land that reads tap for add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, or tap to add black or white to your mana pool. Caves of Koilos deals 1 damage to you. That's a pretty good deal, I guess. Along that lines, mana for damage, we have City of Brass. Whenever City of Brass becomes tapped, it deals 1 damage to you. For tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So it's a very versatile card. And now we have 4 Isolated Chapels. These ones are a little tamer. They enter the battlefield tapped unless you control plains or a swamp. So if this is the first thing in your hand, you're not going to want to play that as your first land, because we have a lot of things we might want to play for 1 mana on the first turn, like Inquisition of Kozilek. So that would be ideal. It's not the worst thing in the world to have it enter into play tapped, but and then it adds white or black to your mana pool. Vault of the Archangel, and then that's a land tapped, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. For 2, a white, a black, and tap it. Creatures you control gain Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. And that's a good one. Just because if you're cranking out tons of those little 1/1s that are expendable to you, and they have Death Touch, then that's potentially wiping your opponent's board, and they can't come back from it very easily. But since they're tokens, and you're just cranking them out, you're coming back from that very handily. And we also have 4 Windbrisk Heights. Land, and it has the Hideaway from the Lorwyn block. Hideaway ability. This land enters the battlefield tapped. When it does, look at the top 4 cards of your library, exile 1 face down, then put the rest on the bottom of your library. You can tap it to add a white to your mana pool. You can do a white and tap to play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if you attacked with 3 or more creatures this turn, which should be easy in this deck because you should be cranking out tons of creatures. Some of them will have flying, so you won't even worry about them dying so much. So this is the sort of thing that, you know, I guess I would hope to get something like Elspeth. Yeah, I think I would want something that was one of the more costly cards to play, and then just sort of sneak that into play. And then we have 5 plains and 4 swamps. So that's the basic deck. It's a pretty simple deck, to be honest, because it's essentially just getting a lot of creatures with sorceries and planeswalkers, and then buffing them with enchantments. And it also has this portion of the deck is interesting to me just because there's some pretty substantial control there with the Tidehollow Sculler and the Inquisition of Kozilek. Now this looks like the sideboard, but also it's going to have mirror tokens, and probably also some soldier tokens. So, some cool mirror art there. Those are from the Mirrored-In set. And some... Oh, I think I can't remember which art this is for those soldier tokens. I don't know if that's specific to this set. And then we have our first card in our sideboard is the Relic of Progenitus. For 1 colorless, we have an artifact where you can to make target player exile a card from his or her graveyard, or you pay 1 and exile the Relic of Progenitus, exile all cards from all graveyards, draw a card. So this is specifically to counter stuff that has graveyard effects in the modern format, like Dredge is particularly rough to go up against. We also have Burrenton Forge Tender. For 1 white, you get a Kithkin Wizard with protection from red. Sacrifice Burrenton Forge Tender. Prevent all damage a red source of your choice would deal this turn. And that's a 1/1 creature. So this is to deal with burn decks. We have 3 Duresses. If your Inquisitions and your Tidehollow Scullers weren't enough to get rid of, you know, as anti-control, then the Duresses are even more tricks up your sleeve to get rid of stuff like really bad instants that are going to mess your day up, and really bad sorceries. Running out of room. Okay. Gataki War's Wage. For 1 and a white, you get a legendary creature, Spirit. All artifacts have, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this artifact unless you pay 1. So, and that's a 2/1 creature. So artifact decks, specifically decks that are, you know, what's the affinity decks that are cranking out tons and tons of artifacts, are going to really get hurt by that. Because while, yes, they can crank out tons of them, they're not necessarily going to be able to pay for all of them once they're all in play, because the number of artifacts often outstrips their mana production. So that's a check against that. Then we have 2 Dismembers. It's a great card. It's 1 and 2 Phyrexian black mana, and a Phyrexian black mana can be paid with either a black mana or 2 life. So even on turn 1, even with 1 man out, you can play this, as long as you're willing to sacrifice 4 life for it. The effect is target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. The great thing about that is it gets around things like indestructible and regenerate. So yeah, Dismember is a very powerful card. Anything that's got 5 toughness is sweating in its boots about Dismembers. So that's good. And then we have 2 Ghost Quarters, and those are both lands that say tap to add 1 to your mana pool, or tap and sacrifice Ghost Quarter, destroy target land. Its controller may search his or her library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle his or her library. So this is to get rid of problemsome lands that your opponent has, and that's pretty much the whole deck. I'm not like a big Modern player, but I personally think that this deck looks like a promising start to a deck. I'm assuming this is based off an archetype within Modern, that usually these sort of event decks are intended to be an entry point rather than a finished product. So there are definitely things that are supposed to be put into this deck to make it even more viable. I wouldn't assume that the tournament ready, or, well, I mean, this is technically tournament ready, but it could definitely be improved upon. But the competitive version, I should say, of this deck would not only run 1 of Elspeth and 1 Sword of Feast and Famine. Well, that's debatable, I guess, but yeah, the deck itself could stand to see some more consistency from more 4-ofs. But it already has some 4-ofs, and it looks like it's accomplishing its goal of cranking out creatures. But I'd love to hear what you guys think about this deck, whether you think it's a good start into a good start into Modern. Currently we have this posted on untapgames.com for pre-order, and then tomorrow it's going to be up for actual order. So you can go on to untapgames.com and check that out. I'll have a link in the description. This is also, we're nearing the last day for our May contest, so you should definitely go check out our Facebook page. All you need to do is like the May contest question on Facebook, and you're entered for a chance to win a half a booster box of Journey into Nyx. So definitely check that out. Go like that, and also just let me know what you think in the comments. And and I should say that's at facebook.com/untapgames. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I appreciate you coming with me this far, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.